Okay, let's get started. For those of you who don't know, my name is Eddy Webb. I am one of the in-house developers here at Onyx Path Publishing. This is my first ever Twitch live stream, so if you're having any problems with audio or just not seeing something, let me know. I'll try to get it updated when I can, as I'm still kind of learning how this all works. But I wanted to spend some time today because a lot of people ask about what goes into the development process, what it's like to be a developer, what kinds of things a developer has to do. And if you're familiar with our podcast, the Onyx Path cast, me as well as my co-hosts, Matthew Dawkins and Dixie Cochran, we've talked a lot about the development process and what kind of goes on, but sometimes it's easier to just show people what kinds of things we're doing. So I thought it might be some good time today. I want to show you one specific piece of the development process, specifically what we call proofing. If you see on our weekly Monday morning blog, you'll sometimes see the book is in proofing or it's in post layout examination. And that's what the proofing process ultimately is. What happens is the developer, someone like me, will take the first initial layout of a book, taken the manuscript and the art and put it together into a manuscript that's going to very closely resemble the final product. And then we go through and mark up any comments or concerns and basically have a conversation with the art director in terms of what needs to change, what could change, what improvements we can make, and so on and so forth. Originally, when I planned to do this, I was hoping to do an actual live project and show you how the process worked, but I'm not doing that for a couple of reasons. One, the project I thought I would do ended up being extremely clean, so I had no comments on what that was going to look like. And the other one is also, if I was doing it just completely live, blind, it would be a lot of me staring at the screen going, well, maybe that. So instead, I thought it would be much more appropriate to take an existing product that I did proofread and show you the various different stages of what kinds of comments go on, what kind of discussion I have with the art director, and then kind of roughly approximate what that process looks like. And yes, thank you, Nathan Knack, in the chat. I am extremely professional right now. I have buttoned up completely because this is serious business. So let me go ahead and transition here. What I'm showing you right now is this is the very first proof I got of Dystopia Rising Evolution. This is the book I'm going to walk through people on today. And the art director on that was Michael Chaney. So you're going to see occasionally comments from him, but really what's happening is this is a conversation between me and Mike Chaney talking about what the book is going to finalize look like. Now, to be clear, prior to this, Mike and I had discussions about what the book look overall was going to be. This is past that stage. This is a brand new game line for us, so we were trying to take inspirations from the previous versions of Dystopia Rising, the live action components that this is based off of, as well as our own little kind of spin and tweak on things. So that discussion's already been had. What we're having here is Mike putting it together and me giving comments at that point in time. Another thing I want to mention before I go into this is, as a developer, really I'm trusting Mike to handle a lot of the artistic side. So the comments you'll be seeing throughout this are really more along the lines of this is unclear, or this piece is missing, or what can I do to help you make this look better. So I'm really not telling Mike what this book's going to look like. Mike knows way better than I do what this book should look like. So really I'm just focused on making sure that the material putting in there is fitting within the space that he has. So you see at the front is a blank page. This is, at this stage, we don't have the cover art yet, which means you don't have the title page yet. So as Mike mentions in the comments, once we get the cover done, then this shot would go in here into what he calls the frontis. The frontis is the industry term for the very first front page of the book. And so now you see here, this is kind of the initial layout of the book. Mike's already established the backgrounds, look of it, the texture, as we tend to call it. This is where the table of contents will go once it's finalized. We don't finalize that yet at this stage for a couple of reasons. One is Mike wants to make sure that all the material in the manuscript is where it needs to be. And also, we don't know what the page numbers are going to finalize yet. So at this stage, it's not quite worth putting in the original material. I don't leave comments to each other in as PDF comments inside the PDF. So these are like little notes to each other. Right here, Mike, for example, is putting notes of what the artist names need to be for the art by, because by the time I wrote the credits, I didn't know who all the artists were going to be. So this is usually, we put the artists in at this stage. Mike here mentions that he needs both the StoryPath logo and the our partner, Eshton Media, their logo here to make sure that's all in there. So you see there's a lot of stuff missing here, and as you can see, you'll see there's blank pages as I'm flipping through. Mike's giving a lot of room here to make sure there's plenty of room for the table of contents, and also for the initial art to open the book with, I should say. Oops, I flipped here. So this is the first pass to kind of the introduction to the book. This is my first chance to kind of see like what the header's gonna look like. Is this clear? Does this make sense? Up here also we have the headers, and some books will have footers down here. DR doesn't really have footers. We decided to reserve for the headers here. And one thing you'll notice, I noticed this early on actually, is that the font as Mike is using to do the punch tape look here doesn't have an apostrophe. So as you go through the references it's making here, like what you'll find within, this is the header it's doing, because these headers are meant to reference the very first section, the very last section of the page page spread here. So this one, there's a apostrophe here, it's not in here, and originally I was going to call it out and mention that, but I realized that odds are this thing's missing it was called a smart apostrophe, the curved apostrophe. Usually they have the dumb apostrophes. It would involve Mike going through and adding all of those in. And also I felt that having the punctuation drop actually added to the kind of grungy DIY look of Dystopia Rising. So it actually wasn't really it was something I was like, is this a problem? Is this a fault? And I felt like it actually does add to the book the fact that that's missing. So I decided to not raise it up with Mike. There are other things that I will mention later, but that was one I saw and just decided not to even comment on. This here is a placeholder. Basically, the idea is that Mike wants to have art here between these interludes. For Dystopia Rising, I broke it up into 3 books to emulate the 3 chapters that were in the original core tabletop role-playing game, Flesh, Blood, and Bone. So there's lots of smaller chapters in this, but they're still categorized into 3 books, which is the player section, the storyteller section, and then the story guide section, and then the kind of material or background material section. For this, he has the text here as kind of as a placeholder. We don't know what the art quite is yet. He had to ask me which art pieces go in which places. So this is a note, that we have the art, but we need to figure out where they go at. And again, this is kind of a rough idea that there's going to be a full piece of art here. This is the first chapter. So you notice that at this stage, there's a lot of stuff missing, and that's intentional. Again, it's a conversation Mike and I had. Initially, he gave this to me with full awareness that things are going to be missing. So at this point, I'm really looking at, are there any major problems? So to kind of flip ahead here, there's one that ahead of time I point out is that on some of these pages, like here, you notice that this texture that we use behind the words to give the illusion of it being on a piece of paper, they ends around the bottom here, but on these 2 pages, they carry through. And so I point out to Mike and say, how do we want to deal with that? You also notice there's a black space here, which is where one of the art holes is. And then here's another example. Like Mike actually had the art for this piece, so he actually put the art in so I can get a sense of what this is going to look like. So if you scroll back here to chapter 1, it was just blank, but you still see the texture of the page around it. Moving up here to chapter 2, you see the art is in here, but you still see the texture that just kind of faded between the two. So it's actually kind of behind, if you will, in layout, this texture, so we can still see that around. It still kind of keeps the connectivity together. And also here, there's supposed to be full-page art pieces. They're not in here yet. This is actually something that I want to point out is originally these were called the Elitists. The name changed pretty late in the process. So these are kinds of things that I'm looking at. Is this stuff clear? Is this stuff in here? All the material as I'm flipping through does look accurate. So that's kind of what Mike sent me. So let me show you now. After Mike sends me that, I make my own comments, and I start to actually compile them and give them back to Mike. So this is the version I sent back. You'll see I deleted all Mike's comments, so that way it's not confusing. It just helps me to keep things clear. But you see it's the exact same file that I had before, but now I have my comments in. So I'm going to jump to some of those. Like I mentioned before, this is the one I talked about. Some page textures do run to the bottom of the page, and some don't. So I want to double check with him to make sure that if that's intentional, if he has a reason for that, then cool. I trust that he's doing that particular reason. But if it's not, then I want to make sure that let him know that I saw that, and that was something that we might want to think about revising. Another example here is Mike made the comments. I didn't get this far past it, but on this chapter, in this version, actually, you notice that the art changed. We clarified which art pieces went where between these stages. But Mike made a comment here that we wanted to actually get these onto two-page spreads before, if you saw the last version, it started on the right-hand page, it ends on the next left-hand page, and we didn't want that. So Mike left a comment here that Rich likes to have his splats double-facing pages, so we need something on this extra page here. And another art piece, it wasn't worth commissioning a whole other art piece just to fill this page. And also having two art pieces is only something we don't do when we have two art pieces together on the same spread. I leave a lengthy comment here where I talk about, scroll ahead on me there. Maybe there's a chart showing the different lineages of the game and the three variations, and I'll explain that in a minute. But also I talk about moving some of the sections around a little bit. As I'm now seeing it visually, there's a certain way of information I want to get across, and so I kind of move to that. In Dystopia Rising, there are 8 kind of large playable groups, which, as I mentioned, are called lineages, and we want to get this classic-looking two-page spread with them. You have a piece of art in there, you have the big strong title in the back, you have a quote, and as you flip through the book, the intent is you'll see all these different groups and go, that guy looks cool, that person looks cool, that's interesting. First couple things you noticed is from between the two drafts, Mike changed the font on this. We decided to go a different direction with the fonts. The original was kind of just a placeholder. Also added a different texture back here, so it looks distinct from the other pages. It pops out more. It gives more of a kind of impact when you look at it. The other thing is we have most of the art pieces in here, so we get a better sense of how the page lays out. And one thing I mentioned here is that each of these lineages has 3 strains that are associated with them. So you choose your lineage in Dystopia Rising, and then you have one of 3 strains you play off of that. So the actual character you play might be a Sensorite or a Red Star or one of the Unborn, but they're all part of the devoted lineage. And so my suggestion was we might want to move this over to the next page, so we have one strong page of here's the devoted lineage, and then one page of here's all the strains. So that way it's a little more clear. And we have enough room down here, we can just start moving a text over. And that's something I note throughout, that we can all do this. Particularly here is a good example, is these 2 lines can easily just pop over there, and then gives a nice clear delineation between this is the lineage material, this is the strain material. And usually Mike's aware of these things, but when you're putting a whole book together, it just helps to have someone with another pair of eyes to go, oh, this could look better over here. And again, sometimes Mike doesn't agree with me. Sometimes he has a good reason why he's laid out the things he does, and I trust him to do that. But again, it just helps because from my perspective as a designer, I know the kinds of things players are looking for when looking at this book. Mike doesn't necessarily know the material as well as I do, so I could say, I see what you're doing here, but I think it'd be stronger if we had this piece over here, this piece over here. Let's talk about that. And so all of these comments are going to be some variation on, obviously the splat art is missing there. Splat is, for those of you who know, our generic term for a playable group. So a vampire clan is a splat, mage group is a splat, in this case the lineages are a splat, character class in D&D would be a splat. And when we do these 2-page spreads like this, they're usually 4 splats specifically. So another thing I want to kind of show is, I mentioned kind of all these different pages here. Also, there's other things like this. Chapter 3, sometimes I'm making comments, like just very straightforward comments like this one, which is, the period's missing at the end of the sentence. Whether that was on me or just didn't make it through layout, sometimes it happens. But part of my job is to kind of just note, oh, hey, there's a little thing here missing. One thing I'm not doing at this stage, which I want to reiterate, is you notice this page XX. This is the dreaded page XX joke that's been going on for over 20 years now with White Wolf. Yes, we do have the book with XX in here. We very rarely have them reach the final product anymore these days, but we still use them at this stage. And I'm not filling it in yet because you'll notice I make comments here. It's like some of these things have overrunning text. For example, these are the player characters. And you notice for this one is a good example. We want to put the character sheet on this page. And there's just way too much text. The writer sent to us, and I don't know sometimes how much text is needed until we have the art in and see how it looks like. This character is a very large club, and it takes up a lot of space. And so what I'm doing here is I'm suggesting all different lines that we can just cut to get this text down to a single page. Also, I am suggesting right here that because this text going along, that originally I had quotes for all of his characters, to actually cut all these quotes out just to give some more room on here, because I think having the art be bold and stronger makes more sense. That's probably what Mike wants to go with. And also we want to have the character sheet here. Character sheets are not in yet at this stage. Because at this point, Mike had not actually designed the character sheet, so that's one of the reasons why it's missing from this proof. As I'm going through, I'm also having to cut down text, and that changes page references. Like for example, if I were to do page references now, and if for some reason I want page reference Spine's role-playing tips, well, that's on page 57, but I want to get it on the page 56. So there's just really no point in doing page references until we're much, much further along. As a note, Nathan asked in the chat, I wonder how much of proofing layout follows strict guidelines and standards and how much of it is reactive and improvisational based on placeholder content and images. And it depends. It's a bit of both. In this case, the reason why I wanted to show Dystopia Rising specifically is because it was a new game line. We were still figuring out what the look is going to be for it. Prior to this, Mike and I had some conversations about what the overall look could be and whatnot. But really, that was largely between him and Rich to figure out what kind of fonts we're going to use, what the art style is going to be, and also we had to collaborate with Ashenton Media to make sure they were okay with the art style and the individual art pieces. So once we get the art in and looking at the stage, Mike has a certain idea of what the overall book's going to look like, but sometimes you have to just put it in and see what happens. I can't say specifically what Mike's decisions are in terms of how much of this is like it always is this way and how much of it is him trying new things. That's really more of his session to have. But from my perspective, from the developer, I'm going to have some thoughts and ideas, and a lot of times some of the text I leave in, some of the text I cut out, some of the text I add in the book really depends on actually seeing the layout first. So there is definitely a lot of reactivity, and certainly there's material that either didn't exist or gets cut at the very near the end because we just find out it doesn't fit with the layout as it exists. Situations like this with these 2-page spreads, they're going to be more improvisational. I've generally found in the past that about 500 to 750 words works for these, but sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. Like I could fit more words on Talia's write-up here than I can write on Solomon's write-up, and until we get the art in, I just don't know what the edge is going to be. But even then, Talia's is still pretty long, and like I thought the quotes would be a good idea, but as we're looking at it, it's like the quotes just weren't making sense in the layout, so I had to cut them. So it does really depends on who's doing what. Let me pull up some other ones here. A lot of these are going to be at this stage the cut quotes. So let me kind of jump ahead. This is the spread between book 2. I mentioned before that I had divided up into 3 books, and this is what Mike wants it to look like. And I think it's gorgeous. I think it's wonderful. But also there's a lot of space here. Again, I didn't know exactly what this was going to look like when I was commissioning the writing. So I made an estimate based on the conversations I had with Mike previously. Turns out that this fiction's a little short. So do we need to add something here? The other side of it theoretically is I could trim this text down like I did with the other splats, but considering we have this here and this art piece, that's not going to help us much. We've already commissioned this art piece, we want to use it, and also the 2-page spread dividing books looks visually nice. It's something that I remember doing on Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. It has a nice look and feel, so I thought it was worth preserving. So rather than that, it's more, do we tweak the text? Do we add something here? How do we resolve this problem? And again, I'm trusting Mike to kind of come up with the answer. So I'm saying, hey, what's going on with this? I'm also looking at specific layout concerns, and this is something that I find newer developers working the proofing process don't think about because they're just not realizing it's something they have to think about necessarily. But there's a concept called widows and orphans, and basically it's if there is a header by itself at the bottom of a sentence, or if there's just one strict line at the top of a column, you usually want to have those moved around a bit. Like this really should be on top of here. Even if it does change the layout slightly, it looks better if this is right next to that. We don't want to have a header here and then nothing underneath it. We don't want to have just a single line at the start of a new paragraph at the bottom of a column. We don't want to have the last line of the end of a paragraph at the top of a column. And when you're laying out a book that's almost 300 pages, sometimes you're going to miss the occasional one. So again, having someone like me go through and say, oh, by the way, this is missing. Something else is looking for page numbers. That's another common error. Is usually these are automatically generated by InDesign, but sometimes there's a slip on the background texture or a piece of art where the page number doesn't show up. Now, we decided with Soviet Rising and really with most Onyx Path books that if the art is in the area where the page number would be, that the page number does not usually go over top of the art. So in this case, you notice that page number 103 is missing here, and that's intentional in this case. It's like we recognize that we want it to be that way, but sometimes this number is just missing here, or it's formatted oddly. The font is off. Sometimes the texture behind these, for example, is missing because this is again put in as part of the page, but Mike has to adjust these because we want chapter 4 here. The length of this is going to be longer, or a different size, I should say, than chapter 3, because it's a different. Actually, that one's pretty close. But if you look over here, like Learning and Advancement, that's a shorter one. This is longer, so Mike's going to have to adjust each of those, and sometimes mistakes happen during that process. And again, kind of reiterating here is that actually that was not an example, but the apostrophe here, Learning. If you go back here, this was the start of the section, Learning, there's an apostrophe there. It's missing from here. But as this goes through, this is still that same section, so that same header should be identical throughout. So also checking to make sure that these headers are correct. And 90% of the time, the layout person is typing these in manually, so making sure there's no typos in that, because that's not something an editor would have looked at because they did not exist. So it's really on me to make sure, hey, is this correct? Is this this might be listing as the wrong chapter, something like that. So another example of this is we have specific visual formats for conditions. Let's see if I can find one real quick. Well, I'll show it to you later. I'm sure I'll come across one. But These are entry conditions in Dystopia Rising. I did not, in the text, make a note saying these need to be formatted like conditions. And that was on me. That was my mistake. I didn't clarify that to Mike. So since these are specific conditions, they need to be formatted. They have the same header and the same text to look like the other conditions in the game, actually. I think I can actually jump ahead here. Here we go. Yeah, so these are the way the conditions should look. These are they have a different font here. There's a different texture behind them. And the bottom text is fine, but this needs to be the same. So on here, it's using just the normal header, like you see here. It's using that text, so it really should be using the condition text. Again, that's something the layout person's not going to know, but I as a designer go, oh, that really should be this different way instead. Another example of things to look at is, I am looking at typos too. I'm generally not reading this heavily, but like for example, this was supposed to be chapter 8. This is chapter 7, and then Mike just made a mistake. This is supposed to be chapter 8. So because he's typing this in, that is more the kind of typos I'm looking at. I'm not really rereading this text. As I'm skimming it, I may occasionally see something, oh, by the way, this needs to change. But really what's happening is I'm not sitting down and reading the book from beginning to end again. I've already done that several times by this point, through the development phases, after the editor sent it to me, so on and so forth. So the only text I'm really proofreading at this stage is stuff that's uniquely created for this layout. So it's headers primarily, stuff like that's in the background or in the columns here. Because Mike had gotten the chapters wrong, this was supposed to be chapter 8 up here in this header. It's chapter 7, so that's the other thing I need to kind of mention, look for. This is another case where these were all edges that were created for faith powers. And they use the same kind of look as the headers here do. They have the black streak in the back with the punch tape font. So I had to mention that all of these need to have that look as well. I have one kind of cut reference here. So this was, right. This was something that there was a mistake on my part when I sent these chapters in. First of all, you'll notice that here, this is the edge header I was talking about before. This chapter did have them. So this was the look that it should have been in the previous chapter. So I was able to point and say, hey, look at this instead. But when I sent this chapter in for layout, I did not actually correct the changes in editing. For some reason, I skipped over this chapter when I was going through the edited comments. Usually they're tracked changes. And so what I do is I either accept or reject them, and usually just final rewriting as necessary to be able to make sure it's in the best possible state before I send it to layout. I forgot that with this chapter. So I was in a case where I had to actually make the edits I would have normally made in editing in layouts, and that's something that for Onyx Path, ideally we don't want to do. Other companies tend to do a lot more editing in layout than we do, but from my experience in Onyx Path, Mike really wants to have the text as clean as possible because they can start making informed decisions. He doesn't want large chunks of text moving around after he's already figured out where it needs to go. So in this case, this was a section that actually needed to cut, and that needed to be resolved. So I asked him to do that, and you'll see in this on the left side here, a lot of page numbers. There's a lot in these few pages because, again, this area I did not deal with as well in editing. But usually that's not something that happens here. Another case is this is the adventure. I had an example here, and Mike uses a default kind of, he changes the font and changes the background texture for examples so they pop out a bit more. But this is supposed to be all the same examples, so it's a note of like, hey, this is not two different examples. This is the same example. And then again here, I mentioned before, the stuff at the top is generally created by the layout person. In this case, those are wrong information. It says ready to play characters, but this really is the let the die. So that should be instruction notes, actually, should be here. So these are the kinds of things that happen at the beginning. The other thing you'll notice, look at the end here, is this is the last page. There's no index at all after this because we haven't done the index yet. Indexing occurs when the layout is completely solid. Same thing with page numbers. We don't want the indexer to say, oh, it's on this page, and then we make a decision and a change, decide, oh, we're actually not, the text's not there anymore. So we want to make sure that the indexer has the best page numbers when they're going through and actually compiling their index. So let me show you, this is another draft. This is the draft that we sent out for errata, and me incorporating from the errata pass. So what happened here is this is the version we sent out to the Kickstarter backers. This was what we called our beta PDF. It's not final. We specifically wanted people to go through and make comments so they could do final corrections. So we gave them, I think it was about 2 to 3 weeks to be able to compile that. I then took all that information and went through and actually updated it with the new information. So this is another case where we're kind of editing in layout, but in this case it's more, oh, hey, we've since discovered these things have changed. So a couple things you notice right off the bat is we now have cover art. So we got the cover approved by HT Media. I should mention the other proofs were this art was already approved by HT Media, but this specific combination of this logo and this art was not approved yet, which is why it was not in the original layout. This is the art, and of course we generally use the art piece as well for the title page. So from a book perspective, this is the front cover. When you open the book, this is the first page you see. And so the main differences are we have the quote now and the writers here. Side note, I didn't give Mike this quote. I believe Mike found this quote and added it himself, and it's fantastic. I think it's great. Putting a George Romero quote makes a ton of sense for Dystopia Rising. So there's definitely times where a layout person can add their own little bits and pieces of flair that weren't mentioned in the book that really help out. You'll also notice here that the table of contents is complete because now this is a stage where when we sent it to the backers, the text was pretty stable, so he can go ahead and compile this. My understanding is this is done automatically to a certain degree, so the page numbers and whatnot are dynamic when Mike organizes it, but it's still better to have this text be a little more stable before he goes ahead and does this because there is some manual tweaking that happens here. You also notice those logos that were asked for before since have been found and now added over here. You'll notice that this has changed. Mike changed the font for the word evolution, so this looks a little different. These kinds of things will happen over time. At the stage I'm looking at now for the errata proofing, the look of it's pretty much what the book's going to be. Sometimes these things do change, especially in newer games. When we're doing a brand new game like this. Say, well, actually, no, this doesn't look quite right, and there's no predefined format. Now, when we did the 2 support products, like the Jumpstart and the Bestiary for Dystopia Rising, they were inheriting decisions we made on this book. So they're going to have this look, this background, these textures, because now it needs to look like a game line. These look like a cohesive, comprehensive book. Again, you notice that I didn't really make any comments on what this changed. That's happening on the layout side. And again, I'm trusting Mike to handle that. And it doesn't impact the playability of the book. So a lot of times at this stage, I'm also going, oh man, that looks cool. I'm just really happy with the stuff Mike's doing. You notice that at one point I mentioned, hey, there's something to go here. And this is a pretty common thing that Mike will do is he'll put like some kind of icon here to kind of fill up a space and make it feel like it's a full page. And this skull has always just been really great. And also, from years of working with Mike, I know that skulls are kind of a common motif with him. So it works really well with Dystopia Rising, definitely. One thing I want to mention in the chat, Ian mentions the Prophecy of the Phoenix, which played a big part in the tail end of Mage Ascension's metaplot, was originally made up by Aileen Miles as part of her layout process for the Order of Hermes Tradition book. So layout can have a big effect on setting, and that's really true. Certainly, there are times where setting material gets cut or setting material gets added because it needs to just fill in the gaps. For example, on Monarchies of Mao, I had Matthew Dawkins writes the different callings for the cats. And he had these great little blurbs of these different little factions and groups that each of the callings could theoretically belong to. And I thought it was a cool idea, but when we got to layout, there was just too much text, and there was an easy part to cut. You don't need that material to play each of those callings. So while it was an unfortunate kind of omission, something that we had to cut, it impacted the setting to a certain degree. Those are material that we're not referencing anymore. And in a similar boat, let me kind of jump ahead here. I had mentioned before that the strains, there was a blank page missing before, and this is what was eventually added. We have here the 8 different strains, and then the 8 different lineages and the 3 strains that come off. That was that note I made in a previous draft, and now here it is. There was a couple drafts in between these that I'm not showing because they were just very small iterations where Mike had some initial versions that I had to clarify spelling and the like. But this is completely new, and this was not originally in the book. It wasn't intended. I never wrote any material for this originally. But this turns out to be a nice kind of visual look of here's what those things are together. So now at this stage, like I said, I'm primarily doing errata. So it's little things like each strain has an additional edge your character will receive, and I've changed it to additional edges. That's a very small change for a pretty heavy design decision. One thing I noticed during playtest, I originally had an edge that your character got for each lineage. So for example, there's an edge here, and you got an edge here. And that was the original idea. You get one edge each time. What I discovered through playtest, and also was pointed out to me by Danielle Lazam, is that some of these edges are more than 1 dot, and some of them aren't. So what's happening is some people are getting a 2 dot edge for free, and some people are getting a 1 dot edge for free. So it kind of became a little unbalanced. So what I did at the last minute is I had to rewrite them so that way everyone got 2 dots worth of edges. Some of those were a single 2 dot edge, and some of those were 2 1 dot edges, like in this case. And so what I had to do is I had to change the text to edges and then add in devotion and mind resistance. Well, no, first dot. In this case, it's mind resistance 2 dots to clarify that there have been both two of the 1 3 dot mind resistant edge. We also, some people found some typos during the course of the rewrite process, so those get incorporated in. Also during this stage, we had some Kickstarter backers who had pledged to have their names put in. And one of the secrets I'll tell you of layout is when you have these quotes here with the names at the bottom, for at least the past few years for me, that's been a place where I kind of mentally go, it's an easy place for me to put Kickstarter backer names. So for example, this one, Leo, aka Roverdad, that was a Kickstarter backer. I actually don't even remember what name I put here previously. But usually these are nice little bits of flavor. And if people send me character write-ups, I can sometimes tweak the text to be a little closer to the character they envision. But really, it's a good place for me to kind of put their names in. It's a nice prominent place so the Kickstarter backers feel cool. They quickly flip to a page and go, that's my character. But it doesn't really impact my ability to adjust the text at all, and it really doesn't impact layout much at all. So it's a nice, easy way to do it. And it's these quotes serve a lot of purposes, but one of the additional purposes over the years we've discovered is they're a great place to put Kickstarter backer stuff. Here's another example of layout concerns is if you look at the highlight of this very carefully, you notice the highlight goes over this character's eye here. And that's because what's happened in layout is that normally the edge of this, Mike has to manually change it so it follows the edge of the line. So he's actually moving this text around so it's got that little kind of ragged edge here. But he forgot to do it here. So actually what happens, a couple of words fell behind the piece of art. So either he needs to move this art over a bit more or change the ragged edge. That way these words become clear. And this actually does happen pretty frequently, specifically in art that's not square or rectangular. So something that, again, newer developers always think about is when you have these dynamic art pieces or the art pieces that kind of are very close to the text, you have to check to make sure all of your words are actually there. But in this case, I didn't even notice it until the errata phase. So it's something that was pointed out in errata. So it's a hard thing to catch. It's a hard thing to remember to look for, but it is an important piece because people then think, oh, you forgot these words. Like, no, the words are there. You just can't see them. So let's look at some other pieces here. That was a late stage design change, which I try to avoid, but sometimes it happens. A lot of these are minor tweaks. Let me check out this one. Like Danger Sense, I just decided that it was only worth a couple of dots, primarily because I think it was only worth 2 dots in Trinity. I believe what happened was this was written originally with using Trinity as a base. So I think what happened here was that originally had 3 dots. They decided to scale it back to 2, and I also scaled it back to 2 because it also helped me to fit in with those. Everyone under getting a string gets 2 dots worth of edges. So it solved a couple of problems. And again, a lot of these hide some pretty complicated design thinking. From layout perspective, all they're deleting is one character, but I as a designer have to know, okay, why is this dot being removed, and does this make sense? So sometimes those kind of changes, again here, do happen. I felt Charmed Life was worth, it's not that powerful 3 dots. I can knock down 2 dots and still fit in with that all strains get 2 dots decision that was made pretty late in the process. This was just kind of a clunky sentence, particularly what happened here is this is kind of a rewrite and deleting a couple of words here and rewriting some concepts here. Because during playtest, someone pointed out that the lore skill, which is about what things happened in the past pre-apocalypse, and the science skill, which reflects things that happen in the modern post-apocalyptic world and how to affect things. There's a lot of overlap in the initial write-up. It really felt like they were kind of doing the same thing, and that was never the intent. So I had to find a way to clarify those 2 skills with the minimum amount of rewriting. And in this case, it was a case of there was one sentence that was really the problem. It was this last sentence here that was the big problem. And so just by rewriting that sentence, I was able to kind of make those a little clearer. So again, I don't, for a new game, you see this more, and that's why I want to pick this one up, is because sometimes you do have things you need to definitely make. In playtest, we found that dive to cover wasn't clear into what exactly happened, so I had to add a sentence because people were. It didn't make sense to dive to cover if you're in a melee fight. It's like, why would I duck behind a barrier if someone's punching me? And that was never the intent, and I thought that was clear, but apparently it wasn't. So I added a sentence saying this is specifically better used against range attack. So they seem like minor points, but they do really help. Also, one thing that happens during layout is that we did not commission quite enough art when we were laying this out originally. You saw there was always some black spots. In that case, it was the art was not done. But there was also, in this case, we needed more arts to fit things out. Specifically, this chapter here is for the different faiths. There just wasn't enough arts to kind of. There's too much text, not enough art. You want me to get art usually about every 5-6 pages. Like you notice here, 2-page spread, and then we have 2 pages of text, 2 pages of text, another art page. That's about right. So we want to have every 3 spreads at the most. Generally, we want to have another piece of art. So look, 1, 2, 3, boom. 1, 2, 3, boom. 1, 2, 3, boom. 1, 2, 1, 2. So I mean, 2 to 3 spreads, you want to have an art piece. So we had to commission some new stuff. So Mike wanted to point out this was a new piece of art to make sure that I was fine with that. Make sure that this was accurate to the art notes that I've written, and also to make sure that Ashton Media had a chance to look at it and they signed off on it. Again, there's some more art here. It was specifically this kind of chapter. So we need some more art. Like the last time we flipped through, you probably didn't see it. It was so quick, but I did. This was a page spread we looked at before. This art piece was not here. It was all just text. Like add this piece and actually move the text around to fit this art piece in. So again, page reference is something we had to do much later because that's what makes the most sense. This is one piece where, because it was a late piece of art, Mike still had a black hole to kind of let people know that it was in progress. And also, because this was originally documented to Kickstarter backers, there's a note to the Kickstarter backers to say, oh, hey, this isn't an error. We're just waiting for this art piece to come in. This was another one. This was an interesting case. You'll see a lot of corrections here. I want to talk about this because this was a good moment of where you sometimes have to pay attention to how art works. This character right here, he has a very distinctive tattoo on his arm. The text here is set in a place called Roscoe's, which this place is meant to illustrate. And when I first saw the art, I was like, okay, cool. It's kind of more of a scene setting. The characters we're seeing in the adventure aren't in this scene. It's rather more of a place setting thing. You're in this place called Roscoe's, which is kind of a restaurant, kind of bar thing. And so we're seeing characters unrelated to the adventure in this scene. So I signed off on this art saying, sure, it's fine. The writer of the section actually contacted me during the errata phase and pointed out that the character here, who's female, has this tattoo. When you read the description of the tattoo, it looks exactly like this. And yet this is very clearly not a woman. So I was under the impression we were not able to change the art in time. So my suggestion was I went through and changed all the pronouns to just change the character to a male character. Mike saw this. I pointed out, hey, Mike, these 3 pages are going to be a lot of changes. Here's what's going on. And we had to talk about it, and he actually said that he could probably get the art changed, and that's actually what happened. So all of these changes actually didn't get made because instead we just updated the art. So as I clarify here, this character is supposed to be female. Tattoo in the art is dead giveaway. This is Lena. So I changed all the pronouns to male. However, if the artist can easily drop the beard or the tattoo, this can solve the issue. And Mike was able to drop the tattoo, or had the artist drop the tattoo. So this now becomes just a completely different character who's not the original character intended for this. So again, sometimes mistakes happen, and sometimes it requires a lot more last-minute rewriting than you expect. This is the final draft, the last thing I made comments on. So you'll see this was... actually, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. This is actually right before last one, so I gave this in the wrong order. This is the one that went before and went to Kickstarter backers. So actually there are some more comments on here. So I mentioned before that we had some passes on this. This was actually an example of that. Like this here is supposed to be pure blood, it's supposed to be 2 words. So I had to put space there. This is an error in how Vegassians were written. This statue though was the pre-errata. And so I have to say also, I'm glad I did this because there are a couple things in here that are worth pointing out. Like I mentioned before, I skipped it in the last pass, but we had adjusted this text to try to get these character sheets in. And how this process works for us now is Mike made this character sheet, and he works with a user who's known on the internet as Mr. Gone. He has been making interactive character sheets for White Wolf games and Onyx Path games for well over a decade now, I have to say. And so we work with him to help make the interactive versions of these sheets, which we can't do until the sheet is finalized. Then Mike gives me the interactive version, and I fill it out, give him that file, and he just drops it into the layout. So if there's errors on this, usually it's my fault. But this was kind of a weird case. If you look here, it's kind of hard to see, but all of these dots around here are completely black. They're black to the edge. For some reason, this manipulation dot is not that case. There's actually white around the edges of the dot. So for some reason, between when I sent the file to him and when he put it in, something changed in there. So he had to go through and manually fix that. Whereas this is a case where I put a typo in the gear. So I changed typo and sent him a new version of the sheet that he could then drop in to make sure that the typo was corrected. Another case of the dot was missing here, or it had some arrows. Another thing is, silly thing is, skills, you have the ability to have specializations, which the players can customize. They're not preset things. And I noticed very late in the process that when the characters were written, she had pretty eyes. And then I noticed that she only has one eye here. So pretty eyes doesn't make sense. So I had to change typos to pretty eye. I think I changed something else entirely, now that I think about it. Hang on, I will check real quick, because it should have been changed in this one. So if you look at the ready-made characters, Talia 09s, no, I did change to pretty eye. Okay, so I did have just a singular here. But again, that's something that I wouldn't think about until I'm sitting here looking at the sheet, double checking it, looking at the art, and going, oh wait, that's not syncing up. There's some problem in Pugmire, which I didn't catch actually, where the Ratter had a foil, but the rep proficiencies you got for that character wouldn't allow you to actually have a foil. So that's something that ended up in the book. There was a mistake in the final book. I didn't catch that. So again, making sure that the art is syncing up to the material is really important. So that's really a lot of the stuff that happens in layout. It's a lot of looking at detail, looking at attention, and you're going through this sometimes over and over and over again. I'm having to pay attention to things like making sure that these paragraphs are actually indented, making sure this is lined up correctly, just to make sure that this is all looking cohesive, and also making sure it's reflecting the text in the way that I originally developed and created it. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to kind of answer those. Go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll answer them as I get to them. As we're waiting, one person did mention that Matthew should probably put the extra little factions on Canis Minor. And that's an interesting point. The material was so short. It was like, I'm talking like I cut maybe a few sentences out of each write-up. It would barely be half a page in Canis Minor. And also, something to talk about is occasionally hear me mentioning we cut material or material got added in. A lot of times when I'm cutting material, it's not because it's the stuff I really think is great and need to stay in the game. I wouldn't be cutting it. I would be asking for a different solution if I really felt it was important to the game. So while it's cool to have these extra little faction nods that could possibly be cool in Monarchies of Mao, the truth is that the Pugmire write-ups didn't have those, and so I felt it was important. It was fine the cats lost those because then it put them more on par with what the write-ups we had were in Pugmire. So I mean, it's not that it wasn't good material. I thought it was actually pretty cool, but the reality was it didn't add anything of note to it. So I mean, if people clearly want to take that as inspiration to write their own factions, that's cool, but it wasn't necessary to play the game. So a lot of times when you hear about cut material, it's usually not because it's vital or fascinating. You're not really missing much if that material is cut. I can't think of any book that desperately requires something that was cut the last minute. If anything, I find the reverse is true. Usually, sometimes in a book, it gets laid on, you go, oh, we really need X, Y, and Z. I remember when we were doing the approval process for a Tal Mahera book for V20, it was really felt there was need for a chapter about Enoch, the city in the afterworld that the Tal Mahera are based out of. It turns out that actually there was a chapter already written, it just had gotten lost in the shuffle, so we were able to quickly add that in and get some art, and it was fine, it was approved, and it was wonderful. So it ended up working out pretty well for everyone. But I think most times it's we need more pages here, or like you saw, there's a page blank, let's add some more material here, let's write some more. There's been times where I've added a few paragraphs to kind of really bulk up a section and make sure it's fitting well. And sometimes some really cool stuff comes out of that. So usually when we're cutting at a late stage, it's very minor stuff. Sometimes during the development process, I'll cut a whole section or chapter, but that's usually because I don't think it's working. So that's less. That's not, again, that's more of the what you're putting in here is not really jiving with the rest of the text, or someone else has something very similar and it's redundant. In Dystopia Rising, actually, for example, I had a lot of disabled writers working on it specifically because I wanted to make sure that disability was presented accurately in the game. And so what happened is a lot of them got really excited about talking about disability, and so I'm running very similar material in slightly different ways. So I end up cutting and combining a lot of that. So you're not really missing anything. It's a lot of talking about the same topics from using slightly different words, which isn't really valuable. Nathan Nack mentions, I still can't believe you cut the whole Snoop Dogg chapter from a buyer. Yes, I cut an entire chapter because I really don't want to be sued by Snoop Dogg. No, there was no actual chapter there. But I mean, it does bring up another interesting point is I've had people ask things like, why don't we use song lyrics in front of chapters anymore? And that's because, to be blunt, record companies are now much more litigious than they used to be back in the 90s. And while we could make a strong case that using song lyrics is probably within fair use and probably not an infringement on their copyright, it's not a battle worth having usually. It's better to just find a different quote instead of trying to reference song lyrics. So, again, there's lots of things that happen in the backgrounds of these games that can impact them in ways that seem trivial, but actually have a lot of long reason or backgrounds behind them. Plastic Age Plays suggests the new mission in life is to recruit Snoop Dogg to work on a Canis Minor project, and that would be amazing if you could do that. I would really look forward to seeing what Snoop Dogg would bring to Pugmire through Canis Minor. So yeah, I have a few more minutes left. If you gave any more questions, put them in the chat. But there is, I think, one more thing that might be worth kind of showing you, and that is the appendix here. My software's glitching for some reason, and my PDF thing just crashed. So that's lovely. Then never mind. What I was going to say was that the appendix in Dystopia Rising was actually a relatively late addition in development, mainly because we had a lot of conditions in the game, and someone during the playtest before layout mentioned that it's really hard to keep track of them. So I realized that based on the various trimming of other sections I had done throughout, that I actually had some word count left over. And so I actually just copied and pasted all of the conditions from various parts of text into one appendix, alphabetized them, so that way people could easily go, oh, here's every single condition we mentioned in the book in one place. And at the time, I thought I was very clever, being like, oh, yes, this will be very easy and it's no problem. Not realizing that if there's playtesting happening during the layout stage, if I have to change the text in the condition in the text, I also have to remember to change the text in the actual appendix. So that ended up being a more complicated process than I had hoped. But still, I think it ended up being a really valuable tool for players. So I'm glad that I did it, but it was just one of those, this will be easy. And it turns out it was not easy. With that then, if nobody else has any questions, I want to thank you guys for hanging out in the chat. I really do appreciate it. I had, looks like up to 11 people hanging out at one point, so that was really, really cool. If you think that there's interest in more of these kinds of sessions where I talk through what development is like, please let us know. You can tweet me on Twitter. I'm at Pugsteady, Pugsteddy. Or you can just contact us through the Onyx Path, through our usual methods, and let us know. If there's enough interest, and if I can make it work well, I might do some more of these where I can show you all the different stages of development from the pitch all the way through the final book. I specifically wanted to do proofing for this one because it is definitely something that's more visual, that really helps to kind of it's really hard to explain unless you're looking at a PDF and showing here's how these things work. But I can certainly walk through every stage of the development process, which might be useful for not only new developers who are working with Onyx Path that want to understand how these things work, but also for people in the community who are just really interested, and also might be useful for things like on their Canis Minor projects. And also, as a personal plug, I do also do other discussion of theory and whatnot in other places, and one of those is extra credits. I have written a number of episodes for extra credits about tabletop role-playing game design. And in fact, sometime today, I think probably in a few minutes, actually, there will be a new episode on extra credits on YouTube where I talk about villains in tabletop role-playing games. So if you would mind swinging over there, giving a thumbs up for any of the videos that I helped to write on, that really helps, and I really appreciate it. And it's also a chance to get a sense of the other things I talk about outside of specific Onyx Path projects. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys later.